good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all to yet another event in the series IHC Conversations with Authors, presented by Habitat Library and Resource Center. On behalf of India Habitat Center, I extend a very warm welcome to the author, Ambassador Rajiv Sikri, whose book, Strategic Conundrums, Reshaping India's Foreign Policy, is being featured in the today's discussion. Ambassador Rajiv Sikri had a distinguished diplomatic career of over 36 years in the Indian Foreign Service from 1970 to 2006. He retired as a secretary in India's Ministry of External Affairs, where he oversaw India's relations with East Asia, Southeast Asia, Oceania, West Asia, Iran, and the Persian Gulf region, and Central Asia. His other senior assignments in the Ministry of External Affairs have been as Special Secretary for the Economic Relations, Additional Secretary for Strategy and Research, Head of the Soviet and East Europe Division, and Head of the West Europe Division. He has served as India's ambassador to Kazakhstan. Ambassador Sikri is a prolific writer and commentator on the foreign affairs. Strategic Conundrums is his second book on India's foreign policy. He has also contributed several chapters in edited books as well as articles in the scholarly journals. Ambassador Rajiv Sikri will be in conversation with Dr. C. Raja Mohan, leading academic, columnist, and foreign policy and strategic analyst. Professor C. Raja Mohan is a visiting research professor and former director of the Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore. He is a distinguished non-resident fellow with the Asia Society Policy Institute, New Delhi. Professor Raja Mohan was previously Professor of South Asian Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Professor Raja Mohan is one of India's leading commentators on India's foreign policy. Professor Raja Mohan's research interests include Asian geopolitics, Indian foreign and security policies, and the global governance of new technologies. He writes a regular column for foreign policy and the Indian Express. The session will be chaired by the President of India Habitat Center, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee is a seasoned Indian diplomat with a distinguished career in foreign service. She has served as India's permanent representative to UNESCO in Paris and held numerous senior diplomatic positions. Ambassador Mukherjee is known for her expertise in multilateral diplomacy, global governance, and cultural heritage preservation. In addition to her diplomatic work, she has authored insightful writings on India's foreign policy and international relations. Ma'am has authored valuable books such as The Indentured and Their Roots, A Relentless Quest for Identity, India and EU, An Insider's View, Bengal and Its Partition, An Untold Story. She is widely respected for her contributions to India's role on the global stage, particularly in the areas related to education, culture, and international cooperation. Thank you, Madam, for taking out time out of your busy schedule to chair this session. I now invite the author, Ambassador Rajiv Sikri, Dr. C. Raja Mohan, and the President-IHC, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, to please come to the dais and request Ma'am President for her opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bhavna, for that introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Veena Sikri, and my colleagues from Team Habitat, and all of you here in the room, and I think the publisher is also here.
Yeah, Manish.
Manish. Welcome, Manish. So it is our pleasure at IHC to host this book discussion today. Strategic Conundrums is an amazing book. I'd gone for the launch by External Affairs Minister. It is particularly timely because it examines India's current and looming foreign policy challenges from a strategic and policy-oriented perspective, including our very difficult neighborhood and the India-US so-called, I call it so-called strategic partnership. The author, Ambassador Sikri, who is known for a bold and realistic approach to foreign policy, urges a reappraisal of India's approach if it is to become a major player in this complex and rapidly evolving 21st century world. A unique feature of the book is that it combines the perspectives of a historian, a diplomat, and a scholar, which he is, all three. And he asks the question of how India should tackle these widening strategic conundrums. And he offers interesting answers to these issues, which demonstrate his out-of-the-box thinking, which I think must have been true since he joined Foreign Service. I remember when I joined Foreign Service in 1976, he was the officer in charge, and the entire 76 batch was terrified of him. So, Ambassador Sikri, in his book, which all of you must buy, it's outside the room, talks about India's geography consisting of 5 arcs, carrying potential and peril. A little bit like Chanakya's approach of concentric circles, which Chanakya said, the closest concentric circle is the most important, that's our neighborhood. Each widening concentric circle means a little less importance as far as foreign policy perspectives are concerned. Ambassador Sikri has given it a twist and a nuance by talking of 5 arcs. The first arc is the arc of prosperity spread across India, Southeast Asia, and East Asia. The second arc is the arc of energy, comprising the energy-rich region of the Persian Gulf, going all the way across to the Caspian Sea, to Russia, Siberia, Far East, and Arctic regions. Incidentally, he speaks fluent Russian and has great contacts both in Russia and in Central Asia. The third arc is the arc of instability, engulfing India from Myanmar to Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran, right up to the Mediterranean Sea. I would add to that, if you would permit, that that arc of instability should now include Bangladesh. The fourth is the arc of uncertainty, comprising Nepal, Tibet, East Turkestan, and Central Asia. I would add Bangladesh to that arc also now. The fifth and final arc of communication is the Indian Ocean, which is perhaps the most important of all. He looks at each arc and he analyzes the challenges from each arc and what it means to us. Then he asks the question, which is very important, that why cannot South Asia become a regional power to be reckoned with, a prosperous region with huge bargaining power, which it is. He also offers a panoramic view of the pillars of our Act East policy and asks the question as to whether we have been truly successful or not and what more requires to be done. The author also recognizes China as a principal geo-economic challenge and offers us a different lens for viewing China, a different lens from policymakers both in MEA and outside. He also emphasizes the imperatives of ASEAN centrality in Southeast Asia and includes Russia correctly in my perspective, in the Central Asian strategy. He also emphasizes and highlights the crucial role stakeholders other than the government can play. And when you go to the chapter on the US, he has some pretty interesting perspectives to offer on our strategic partnership, which after I call it the regime change in Bangladesh. I must confess that when I first read the chapter, I had some question marks. But having seen the regime change in Bangladesh and who brought it about, our so-called best friends, then I think it is really time to read this book and to understand that best friends, in my perspective, should be a two-sided affair, like a love affair. Somebody asked me when I raised this earlier, that it doesn't apply to marriage, ma'am. I said, no, it doesn't apply to marriage. It applies to love affair. A love affair should not be one-sided. It should be reciprocal. And therefore, certainly in the chapter on the US, which I would urge you all to read, he makes some pretty interesting indications of what we did right and what we did wrong and what we should do in the future. I don't intend ever to be the kebab mein haddi or haddi between two kebabs, so I put them together and I'm on the side. I will take question and answers and give the vote of thanks, but otherwise it's over to Ambassador Sikri and over to another very dear friend, Dr. Raja Mohan, both of whom I've known since I joined Foreign Service in '76. Over to you. Thank you. Could I ask the editor also to come up and say a few words, please?
Thank you, Ambassador Mukherjee. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here this evening. As you know, this book is about India's foreign policy challenges. And these challenges become even more intense in today's highly complex geopolitical world. And Ambassador Sikri has beautifully explained those challenges. And more importantly, he has provided some concrete solutions to tackle those challenges. So that's why I feel this book is seminal. It's very, very important. And I think all of us must read it. I read it when I edited the book, when I commissioned him, when I discussed the idea. So we had many deliberations, and we actually didn't agree on everything. So we had some divergence of viewpoints as well. But finally, I think the book has come out really well. It's doing well, and I'm sure it will be of interest to a larger audience. And thank you so much, Dr. Mohan, for being here for this conversation. Thank you so much again. Enjoy the conversation. Thanks.
Let me join Ambassador Mukherjee in welcoming you all for this conversation. Wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I've known Ambassador Sikri for almost 40 years. First time I met him was in Moscow when I'd gone on a defense delegation from IDSA. So he was the political counselor, and this was just before Rajiv Gandhi was to arrive in Moscow, which was his first visit to Moscow as the Prime Minister. So since then, we've kind of engaged, intersected quite a bit, and sparred quite often.
Yeah, not always.
So he barely agrees with me, but I don't disagree with him too much. But we will talk about it today. So I really want to begin by congratulating you on doing this book. I think which really throws a lot of light on a lot of issues. But I want to start by asking you. You've done a book earlier.
Yeah.
This is almost 15
years.
15 years. So why did you want to do a second book? Is it because circumstances have changed, or the Indian worldview has changed? I mean,
You know,
yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay.
my first book was doing quite well, actually, but there were a couple of things. One, it had become a bit dated, and I had been toying with the idea of updating it, but then laziness took over. Then my hand was forced because my publishers, Sage, went out of business in India. So the book was no longer available. And I was wondering what to do, and that's where Manish called me and said, we'd like to publish that book. So we discussed, and I said, there's no point in publishing the same
book,
thing. I'll do a fresh thing, obviously based on what I had written 15 years ago, because some fundamentals don't change. But the world has changed a lot, and this time, my book is focused exclusively on the strategic aspects, whereas my first book covered, some structural issues. There was a chapter on energy security. There was other things. This one, probably with experience and age, it's, I think, a little more thought out from a strategic perspective. And the timing, I think it's a good timing because everyone's talking about, the problems that India is facing. And I think we have entered a qualitatively new phase in our foreign policy and indeed national policy with the coming into power of Prime Minister Modi. So I think all these factors necessitated that I look at the whole thing afresh.
Yeah. No, I think one of the interesting things that's happened over the last decade and more is really dramatic expansion of public interest in foreign policy.
Yeah.
Like you say in the beginning of the book, it's not an elite activity. Certainly no longer can be conducted as an elite activity. When you just look at social media, I mean, your minister has more than 2 million followers. Your spokesman, MEA spokesman, has more than 1 million followers. The amount of interest, you can also see the number of YouTube channels today which are daily speaking on foreign policy. everything that happens, I mean, even faster than people who work professionally in media, old legacy media, if you will. So there is actually interest, expression of a large kind of activity that goes on a daily basis. While this democratization, if you will, of the foreign policy debate beyond a few people is welcome, it's also tends to get very noisy, raucous, hyper-nationalist. Do you think that will help conduct foreign policy, or does it create actually problems for you in terms of, as a professional, you've been inside?
Well, actually my book, both the first book and this one, is targeted at a non-specialist audience. The kind of people, ordinary people, Indians, who are keen to know more about foreign policy and perhaps want to go beyond the, a column or a TV debate or something like that, and try and understand the background a little better in depth. So my thinking was that because foreign policy has got far more important now in our national development, it is important that our population at large, the intellectual class, young people, students, should understand what it's all about, what is at stake for India. Because if you have a goal, as Prime Minister said, of a Viksit Bharat in 2047, you and I may not be around for it, but with the younger generation who have to look. So I think it's up to us to share our experience, our knowledge with the younger generation, and and help them to understand, to navigate, because it's, as you and I know, I mean, I as a practitioner of foreign policy, you as a serious student of foreign policy, it's very complex. So a lot of people just get lost in the fog of detail and trying to understand why is this happening and so forth. Now take Bangladesh, which Ambassador Mukherjee talked about. It impacts us hugely. The Northeast has been stable for 15 years because Sheikh Hasina followed policies that helped us. Last year, you remember a year ago, in the Maldives, there was a lot of concern, which way is it going to go? Sri Lanka, again, a few years ago. So I think that people's lives are affected by foreign policy, and therefore it is important that we try and understand what is happening. Now, one of the welcome things which this government has done, and I think former Minister Sushma Swaraj deserves a lot of credit, is the focus on Indians abroad, the welfare of Indians abroad. Now, when you have 9 million Indians in the Gulf, and you've got 5 million Indians or people of Indian origin in USA and elsewhere, you've got problems with Canada, and you've got 500,000 students. It does matter to ordinary people what is the state of our relations with these countries. So that is...
No, I would say, I would agree with you. I mean, I think the big change that has taken place in India over the last 30 years, one is the consequence of economic reform, which began in the early 90s. I'll just give you one example. I think around 1990, India's total two-way trade with the world was $40 billion. 40 billion. Annual two-way trade was 40 billion. Today, if you include services and goods as well, it's close to more than $1 trillion. That is, more than 40% of our GDP is today connected to the global economy. I don't think India has ever been as deeply tied to the world as it is today. So that's a deep structural change in the Indian economy, where you are really, the amount of business we do, or amount of traveling. You mentioned diaspora. Diaspora has grown by leaps and bounds. Today it's, at MEA's count at least, the 30-odd million, including the Indian origin, the PIOs, as well as the Indians who study abroad or who live and work. So it's a fairly large component externally. But it's really the business that fundamentally changes. And linked to that, given the diaspora, if you get into any international flight, it's mostly Indians. You see them traveling in and out. The diaspora, yeah. But it is, when we count just the volume of flows, has increased so much. But I see a problem, the way how India is dealing with a different world, which is fundamentally we're far more connected, while the discourse on foreign policy still tends to be increasingly hyper-nationalist, while your interests, your requirements demand a lot more patience, a lot more sophistication, I would say. So is that tension, is the discourse, that includes all of us who write from outside, are we adapting enough, fast enough to a changing external environment? I mean, that's one of the purposes of the book as well.
I don't think we are. I think that we need to take, for example, China. You know, our trade with China is enormous, and there's a growing trade imbalance despite all that the government has done in the last 4 years. And yet, you can't do without China, so the political and security considerations have to be balanced against the economic ones. How do you tell a consumer that he or she should not buy a Chinese product when that is much cheaper than a comparable product? And we have seen this now in recent days, where the pressures from the consumers, the businessmen, the economic stakeholders has influenced, I think, the government's decision to sort of get an opening with China.
Yeah.
You can't do without it. You can restrict sensitive areas, sectors of the economy, but otherwise you can't do without it. Similarly, say with the United States or Europe or the Gulf region, your trade and economic interaction is tremendous. Now, that also has a political dimension, because the welfare of these 9 million people in the Gulf, for example, matters politically in India and certain states, including your home state.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, if something happens there, there's a political fallout. So one has to be quite careful there. With the United States, I think the role that the intellectual class and the influence the intellectual class elite plays in shaping our policy towards USA cannot be ignored. And it works the other way also.
No, I think your book, is organized well. I mean, you begin with the discussion briefly of the global order, then you move on to neighborhood, extended neighborhood, then the major powers, end up with a discussion on the constraints and challenges. See, on the global order, well, India's position, I think, has fundamentally changed. We keep talking about becoming a developed country, fifth largest economy, while our position in the hierarchy of the international system has grown. But our vocabulary seems still the same old, non-alignment, strategic autonomy, global south. Are we stuck in the past? I know we've argued on this many times.
Look, Raja, it's my belief that whether you call it strategic autonomy or non-alignment or independent, it's the same thing. And the premise from which I proceed is that India is too big, too self-respecting, too conscious of its own achievements, past, present, and potentially in the future. We cannot really expect that anyone will guide us to higher levels or help us. And Condoleezza Rice came and said, we'll help make you a great power. Nonsense. Nobody helps you to make a great power. You have to take power. So I think that is a very important factor we must keep in mind.
No, I'm just saying, all countries exercise strategic autonomy. I think in Maldives,
they don't.
Maldives, for example, they play between you and China quite well. Our Nepalese friends do it with great sophistication, playing between India. So I think if you're big enough, why should we worry about others pushing us around?
Because they do. And we are willing to be pushed around. Less so now, but in the past we've been, we may be the fifth largest economy or going to be the third largest, But in absolute terms, we are still quite weak. I mean, what's our economy? 3 trillion, 4 trillion, something like that? How do you compete with a 33 trillion or 35 trillion US economy, or a European economy, or a Chinese economy? You just don't have that clout. So we have seen how other powers are always trying to keep us down. Because I believe that no one is going to let you come to the top.
But that should be the starting assumption.
That's the
right?
starting point.
Yeah, so that's
So you have to do
then
it
you
yourself.
play the game, right?
You have to play
having
the game.
yeah.
Now, what is our beef with the United States in recent weeks? We did not support them, the West, on Ukraine and Russia. I mean, it's obvious that we have not gone along with the Americans.
Yeah, so it's
That's fine, but we are paying a price.
yeah, okay. I mean, we can argue on that, whether what's happened in Bangladesh is a consequence of that.
Oh, well, I think it is. I think it is. It will never be acknowledged openly, but the fact that Prime Minister Modi speaks to Biden, and it's given out in our press release that he talked about Bangladesh, speaks for itself. And I don't think the Americans are also now shy about tacitly admitting that, they've had a role. Hey, they are the regime change specialists around the world.
We used to be good at it too. I mean, right? I mean, we've done, neighborhood. In fact,
we've done it.
So it's not. See, look, this is what all big powers do: regime change.
Yeah.
Where they don't like.
Yeah.
So either we do it, and we shouldn't complain when others do it. The question is, in an area of our interest,
No,
we should be the ones doing it, right?
No, 1 minute. But what do you mean, do not complain? Why are the Americans complaining
That's
that
what-
we are...
no,
they're a big power. Why are they complaining about Pannu and so forth? I mean, they do it all the time.
That's what I'm saying. That's how
So,
they. Yeah.
they complain. Why are they complaining about
No,
it?
no, no. Look, I'm saying, if you're big boys playing in a tough field,
Yeah.
everyone is pursuing their interests, in which you jockey, you position yourself,
Sure.
leverage, you use your strengths, you try and minimize your weakness. But that's how life is, no?
True.
Yeah.
So what are you trying
No,
to
I'm saying
suggest?
that, look, like every country maximizes its potential
So
autonomy.
you say we shouldn't complain?
No, do what you want to do, Why are we complaining or all the time, as a protesting, rather than do what you need to do? If you have to go change regime in Dhaka tomorrow, do it, Why are we just, constantly...
Well, I think that... well,
It's okay,
no,
we'll-
that
yeah.
is his style. I think we are doing what we need to do, and but it's done a little more quietly. With our neighboring countries, we have to be a little sophisticated in how we handle our neighboring countries.
Coming to the big picture, I think I think your book begins with this description of the world order today. I mean that the U.S. is on decline, China is on the rise, Russia is on asserting itself. I mean, which is a good. But I suspect that framework is beginning to change, has to change, because the assumption all of us made 2 years ago, even 3 years ago, that China would overtake the United States. In fact, the whole debate was still 5 years ago, 2027, 2030, when will China overtake the United States? But now China has slowed down. The entire assumption seems to be China will never overtake the US because it's dramatic fall in its population, growth rate has slowed down. So this notion, China's an inevitable path to the domination of the world, and the US is on a terminal decline. Those assumptions are coming under fresh questioning, given the America's continued growth, its continuing lead on technology. Shouldn't that be a thing that will be continuously debated, because power never stays static?
No, it's not my view that China is relentlessly rising. In fact, I've made the point that I think China will come down, and it is in India's interest to see how to bring it down. So I'm very clear on that. But you cannot ignore that for the last 15, 20 years, they have grown very dramatically. And it's created a problem for the whole world. Now, neither do I believe that the American dominance is going to continue forever. In fact, the somewhat extra aggressive behavior of the United States in recent months reflects their own slight nervousness that they may not be able to retain this position of dominance beyond 2 or 3 decades. So, they're a little worried about it. I, in fact, go further and say that all the P5 are declining. America is relatively declining. It's still the number one. China, we've just discussed. Russia, obviously, is a far more diminished country, and this war in Ukraine and other pressures are declining. The Europeans have become, in my view, strategically irrelevant, and unless they change their position, they're not doing anything. When you get the German's chancellor standing there while Biden says we're going to blow up this pipeline, speaks for itself. And they've got themselves entangled. So all the P5 are weakening. Now, this is where I see an opportunity for India. That if they are weakening and we want to go, so that's how we have to maneuver to find a way up.
I think that's what the fundamental change from the 50s to today, that your relative weight in the international system is growing because your economy is growing. So I think that's why I'm more optimistic in terms of our possibilities.
Yeah,
and how we are. Yeah.
It's not just being optimistic. I think we need to have that self-confidence and that belief that we can do it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if you are thinking that you'll never be number one, you'll never be number one.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in a class or you're a sports person and you don't want to be number one or you don't want to get a gold medal, obviously you won't get it. So if you think that you're going to wallow in this state forever, you will. Let's have a vision and a confidence.
Coming to the neighborhood, I mean, I think a large part of your book and all the 5 arcs,
neighborhood,
Ambassador Mukherjee has talked about. Why are you pessimistic about the idea of regional integration, regional unity? And you frame it nicely. I mean, between the shared culture, the shared heritage versus the new problems, the identities between the sovereignties that have emerged post-partition. So, I know we've not been successful in putting it all the post-partition wounds and bringing it together. But shouldn't we keep trying to change this dynamic rather than saying it can't ever be done?
No, I don't say it can't ever be done. No, that's not my point. My point is that SARC has failed, primarily because we have Pakistan as a problem state. I think we are far more gung-ho and optimistic about BIMSTEC, though now in the light of the developments in Bangladesh, how that will happen, I don't know. But considering that the BIMSTEC Secretariat is located in Dhaka, there is a stake for Bangladesh to be, active in BIMSTEC. Now, BIMSTEC includes everyone except Pakistan and Maldives. But Maldives we can bring in there. In fact, I would like to see BIMSTEC evolve and expand. And I think there was a hint that the minister gave a few months ago in some interview, I could be wrong, where he talked about extending it to the eastern shores of the Bay of Bengal, Thailand and Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, And that would be a good idea because we need to deal with the Southeast Asian countries not just within an ASEAN framework, but as individual countries also. And we are doing this. And these countries, we have very good relations with all these countries. So my hope is that, maybe we can have regional cooperation, and we should have because, look, we have common interests when it comes to the rivers, which flow from Tibet into India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. We need to work together. We have common interests, say, in the Gulf, where we have 9 million Indians, but all the Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Nepalis, they're also there. So we should be working together. So I think that there is much that we should be doing together because the division of the subcontinent, as we all know, was really artificial. And because, as I have pointed out and you briefly mentioned, that the civilizational and cultural heritage that we all share is now being changed into modern nation-state identity. which compels our neighbors to first distance themselves from it, to say we are not Indian. That's the first thing. Then you distance yourself from India. Then you say, oh, you become anti-India. And finally, anything that goes wrong is because of India's fault. So this thing. But I think that because we have changed our approach to our neighbors, and we are now a little more tolerant, we are understanding how to deal with them. We're not trying to be a bully, we are trying to use inducements, we're spending more money there. That maybe these countries are also realizing that, look, it's in our interest that we plug into India and move ahead, because they also have to have a choice that, when the rest of the world is saying, let's plug into India, why aren't our neighbors doing it? And we have not, other than in the case of Bangladesh, or maybe briefly Sri Lanka, we have not transgressed their sovereignty and territorial integrity. Even Bangladesh, when we went there, we came out, territorial integrity intact. Sri Lanka, we went there, made a mistake, came back. So I think that there is a change of attitude, but this requires very careful handling. And it's not something which I believe it's only for the governments to do. Our public also has to do it, because unfortunately, a lot of our people who go there to our neighboring countries, interact with them, give the impression of being the ugly Indian, kind of boorish, arrogant.
With the Yankees.
Yeah, like the ugly American, So we need to change a bit of that. And I have argued that we should really be treating some of these neighbors like our states, Give them money.
Don't say that. It's,
Yeah, of course. Look, you have to spend money. What is the economic benefit we get by not having an army deployed on the 800-kilometer long border with Nepal? Huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm not saying that, in fact, this chapter 2 or 3 of my book is called Akhand Bharat, question mark.
Yeah.
But I don't think that there should be an Akhand Bharat. I'm not in favor of that. But in a cultural, civilizational sense, we are Akhand Bharat. And this is the dilemma which our neighbors face, that culturally, civilizationally, they are part of the Indian tradition. But
Yeah, it's a core dilemma in our neighborhood. How do you make them benefit from your rise voluntarily? It can't be done under a hegemonic framework. It can only be done. So the question then becomes, how do we persuade them, make it more attractive for them? And that's been the struggle. And I think there's been some successes.
yeah, I think so.
Even with Bangladesh, last 10 years, the significant expansion of connectivity, trade, a lot has happened. The riverways have opened up. Many of the boundary issue has been settled. The enclaves have been restored. So a lot of good has happened.
But there's one thing, which is Bangladesh, that you cannot have a successful policy without the involvement of the states. The Ganga Waters Treaty happened because of Jyoti Basu. The Teesta Water did not happen because of Mamta.
Yeah. So I think after that neighborhood discussion, there's a very interesting chapter on Tibet.
Yeah, and
that brings, in context. Is that, one of your colleagues, Dilip Sinha, has written a book recently on Tibet. The idea that have we kind of didn't get it right on Tibet in the past, and we continue to have a problem of how do we deal with China, because the boundary is actually it's not Sino-Indian border, it's a Indo-Tibetan border. That's what we still call it. So the management of this border and the more deeper, it's not just about the border really, it's about the status of Tibet, it's a question of how Tibet relates to India and China. Is that where we've not been assertive enough, or do you think we've been too weak, too differential to China?
I think we made basic mistakes on Tibet in the 40s and 50s. And, there's the Sardar Patel's famous letter to Nehru, and also what he wrote to the then Secretary General Girja Shankar Bajpai. I think Mr. Nehru had a very minimalistic and constricted view of India's security interests. He looked at India's security from the perspective or geographical perspective of post-partition India rather than the unified India. So, on Tibet, for example, we know that he we withdrew all our forces from there, our presence there, Tibet and East Turkestan. And he was in the Hindi-Chini bhai mood where he felt, it was an error of judgment that he felt that India and China could work together. But that was a wrong judgment, which we know in retrospect. He didn't realize the significance of Kashmir and so forth. For example, it is now well recorded that he said, okay, Kashmir, we can give this to Pakistan. But at that time, there was no connectivity. And today, who would even dream of giving any part of Jammu and Kashmir to China? Even take the Siachen. So many times we tried to have an agreement with Siachen. Do you think the army today would ever agree to walk out of Siachen? No. So that perspective was different. When people asked Nehru in Parliament, why don't we extend our claim lines to Kailash Mansarovar? He says, ye koi zamindari hai? I mean, that was his attitude. When the Khan of Kalat said that, please recognize us as an independent state, he said no. So all these were, a different view of this. Now, Tibet, as you rightly say, is an India-Tibet border. And the Chinese, we had an opportunity to settle it when China was weak, which is when the Dalai Lama fled Tibet in 59. And Chou En-lai came a few months later in 60. That's where a lot of conversations took place on possibly settling this matter. But Nehru had boxed himself into a position, and he was dealing with the Chinese and giving every detail to Parliament, so that politically it became impossible for him to cut any deal.
Are we still in this similar problem? I mean, 75 years after India, China, got their independence, we still don't agree on where the length of the border, we don't agree on where it is exactly located. So at this point, I mean, given China's reality, second most important economy, second most important military power, given that, how do we find a way to peaceful coexistence with them? Is it a problem on our side, or is it a problem for deeper management?
Yeah, it's Tibet, the border problem I don't see going away, because China will always want to keep some leverage over India. It diverts our resources, our attention to the border, away from economic development. And so I don't see the problem going away. In any case, the public positions of the two sides are so far apart that I think in neither country will it be possible for any leader to say, okay, we've got this deal now. I mean, can you imagine in Parliament what would happen if, say, we were giving this, that, and that? And in China also, then the Chinese are saying, oh, South Tibet, the Arunachal is South Tibet. How do you proceed from that? So the public positions have hardened. I don't see a solution, and I think that we'll just have to live.
A frozen conflict?
Well, if it's frozen, it's okay, but we had a live problem in the last few years.
Yeah. No, there are many more interesting chapters. I mean, I think we need some time for the flow. So I would say the questions on Russia, Eurasia, the US, of course, there are a lot of spicy stuff there, but I would leave it to some of you to answer that question. Though I would say that, there is how we think about Russia, the context you yourself has said has changed. How we're thinking about US itself has changed quite a bit in the way the policy, but I would leave that to the floor questions to come. So hopefully there'll be questions on US and Russia from the floor. So I'll hand it over to Ambassador Mukherjee.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sikri and Dr. Raja Mohan. That was fascinating, and I'd like to start off the discussions by asking a question myself, which is that one of the questions which was posed to Ambassador Sikri by Dr. Raja Mohan was about whether we should stick to strategic autonomy, non-alignment, etc. And the answer which was given was that call it what you will, or as Shakespeare said, a rose by any other name will smell as sweet. I think that we need Ambassador Sikri's perspective on what kind of strategic autonomy we have. Have we exercised it in our core national interests, for instance, recently between Russia, Ukraine, and more recently with Bangladesh? And each time in our past, when we had the opportunity to settle our problems, I'm not going to go so far back as 47, but to 71. We had the opportunity in 71 to secure our northeast and our chicken's neck. And there are still people who every day on social media say that India should go into Bangladesh, secure the chicken's neck, secure our policy interests, and the fact that after the liberation of Bangladesh, which became a secular country, there are still 1.5 crore Hindus who want to leave Bangladesh and come to India, which we have not permitted. That was correct. That was not strategic autonomy. That was a very sensible decision. But these are issues which we need to think of, and in that context, think of perhaps a new definition of strategic autonomy, not the Western definition, but an Indian definition. So that is my question, and I will take 2 more questions from the floor and then give the floor back. Sharath, would you like to ask a question? And then Smita, you give a... This is Ambassador Sharath Sabharwal, who is a Pakistan expert. Take the mic, Sharath, and then after that, give it to Smita behind you.
Well, thank you. It's been a fascinating discussion. I wish we had more time, to discuss what Raja said, the US, Russia, etc., but we don't. One issue from my point of view remains unsettled, which was raised here, which is, I agree 100% with you, couldn't agree with you more, that you do what you wish to do without making much noise about it. And I think you agreed with it. But this is a professional's view. And I often, try to look at things that way, but I think from the point of view of a politician, and I'm not talking of a politician A, B, or C, all over the world, this is a trend. They look at it in a different manner. You have an issue, you have a politics of the issue, which therefore warrants that you do make some noises about it. But that ends up then hardening your positions, constricting your space, diplomatic space that you have. So I just wanted to hear your views. I don't think there's an ideal answer to it. But I was wondering if you would have some views on how to achieve a balance, not an ideal balance, but a balance.
Sharath, just pass the mic to Smita behind you. Smita, you have Ambassador.
Thank you. I also wanted to hear your views on the United States, and there's a very fascinating chapter in your book on that. And it brings me to the issue of the nuclear deal. And, it led to the capping of our nuclear weapons test program. The justification was that, we would get nuclear fuel and then transition to the second and third phase of our nuclear, energy program. What has happened to that? I mean, one doesn't hear anything about it. And what do you think we should do in terms of, our nuclear weapons program? Thank you.
Wait. No, please.
Well, strategic autonomy really means that you take your own decision. It could be in support of one camp or another, but it is your decision. It is not because the United States or China or whatever it is tells you, no, this is the way you must do. Now, that is what the United States is doing now. You must be with us on Ukraine, against Russia. Don't do this. Don't buy oil. Don't do... So we want to take our decision. It may be something which the Americans or anyone else wants to do, but it should be our decision based on our assessment of national interest. Now, on 71 and chicken's neck and so forth, well, that option is still open. Yeah. And by the way, I remember interacting with a Bangladesh officer at the NDC a few years ago. I said, what would you say if India requested permission to cross through Bangladesh to secure the northeast? Should there be a problem? And his reply was not negative, because I think the Bangladeshis also understand that, you can cut off that very, very easily. And as I told the editor of a leading newspaper in Dhaka, I said, you're afraid of India. Don't forget, we walked into your country, but we left it with your territorial integrity scrupulously intact. So that is the thing. The Hindus in Bangladesh, it's a problem, I think. It's, in Punjab, you had what we call the Jhatka approach, at one go, everything. In Bengal, it's been a halal. Slow, steady thing. And, I'm saying this before a Bengali, but the Bangladeshi character combines the character of the Bengali and the Muslim. And it oscillates. Now we are back to the Islamic heritage and so forth. And let's not forget that the Bangladeshis were also Pakistanis for a long time. And that element in that society remains stronger. It's very strong right now. So, Bangladesh, what can we do about it? I think we are, as you yourself mentioned a few weeks ago, showing some strategic patience. I don't think we have given up any options. But let's see how it goes. This is one of those issues where I feel that we should tell the Americans, look, enough is enough. We are going to do what we will do. On other issues, yes, we may have to compromise with them. But this, in my view, is a vital issue. Now, what Sharad says, not too much noise, but you yourself said the problem, a politician has to cater to constituencies. And how much you should reveal to the public and how much you should keep away is a political decision which is to be taken. Which is why I have titled my book Conundrums. These are no easy solutions, frankly. As I've pointed out, Mr. Nehru spoke too much in Parliament. Now Mr. Modi is accused of speaking too little in Parliament. So you have Jairam Ramesh asking all kinds of questions, ye hua, wo hua. So every detail cannot be given to Parliament. But one of the problems is that, given the state of relations between different political parties, it's become very difficult to get a national consensus on foreign policy. And this is a pity which has happened. Everyone, to listen to the opposition today, there's nothing which the government is doing right, whether in foreign policy or domestic policy. Now, with that attitude, you can't really have a constructive thing. Smita, on your nuclear deal, I think Raja is in a better position to comment on that. He has studied that and followed it. But yes, I think that we accepted some limits on our nuclear program, which is quite evident. But we thought that in the wider interest, it is okay. The deal was never really about energy. It was about crafting a strategic partnership. That came to it was a step forward, but not the dramatic step that we had hoped it would be. And I think that both sides learned some lessons from that deal that, if you have to try and craft a strategic partnership, you have to go about it with a national consensus where there's an alignment of strategic interests first. You need public support. You need a lot of push from the top. Without Bush and Manmohan Singh wouldn't have done. And even now, without Biden and Modi, the relationship, if left to the State Department, would completely flounder. But I think Raja may have some things to say.
No, I don't think we've really capped anything substantive. That actually the deal was you separate the civilian and the military programs. In return for that, you're gaining access to the international nuclear market. That's what's happened, though. 15 years later, we went and bought a single reactor from the Americans. Only reactors we bought from the Russians, because that got complicated by the liability on a different issue. And then I don't see any stoppage in our nuclear weapons program. In fact, I don't know if you've been following the submarine program. They've just announced building 2 more additional SSBNs, that are ballistic missile carrying submarines. Testing, in any case, look, we were big champions of CTBT for years before Americans came into the argument. In fact, we were telling the Americans sign the CTBT. So we were the great disarmaments, right? We were the idealists calling for disarmament. But tomorrow, if the Chinese test, there's no question. Look, Russians are threatening to test. If Russians test, Americans are going to test. So the whole game is going. So I think that's what is changing. You know? But we shouldn't get stuck on one issue and avoid taking advantage of the situation. Today, for example, the kind of cooperation we're doing with the US, across the board, on artificial intelligence to semiconductors, none of that would have been possible if you say, look, I won't do a deal. Or if you said my strategic autonomy was going to be compromised by what you do with just a nuclear deal. So I think you could elevate the philosophical argument to such a level where you miss the sight of the practical. So I would say we've lost very little. We've actually bought nothing from the Americans. But it opened up space on several other sectors, on space, on semiconductors, on AI, which is where I think we are gaining. This is the future. This is where, I don't know if those of you saw Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, who was in Bombay last week, a big interview with Mukesh Ambani. NVIDIA's market capitalization is about $3.6 trillion. India's total market capitalization is $5 trillion. So you can imagine the size of the company. I mean, the kind of what he's promising, and the agreements he signed with Ambani, Mahindra, and Larsen and Toubro, that the Indian IT sector can be transformed from being the back office. Today it takes almost 10% of our economy into a front office for the world of manufacturing AI. So that's the level at which we are talking. So I don't think the danger is when you get stuck on one small thing and then you don't see the big picture. So I think in the end, our politicians played it right. It had to go through all kinds of hoops, including in the parliament, a no confidence motion, which Mr. Manmohan Singh did not have to do that, but nevertheless. But today I think we're in a different place, and I don't think we've lost any flexibility in terms of our options.
We have time for another two questions. I just wanted to add for the nuclear deal, Raja, that what the nuclear deal did for us, I was Joint Secretary Europe West when we tested and became nuclear, and I was there when we had the deal, is that it brought back India from the cold back solidly where it deserves, in the center of international politics. We are too big and too important to have stayed out in the cold, and it resulted in a recognition that we are a nuclear weapons state and we never signed NPT and we got away with it. We got away without signing the NPT, and we got international recognition of our nuclear weapons status, which gave us the most important deterrence against China. So that is something which is an achievement, which I don't know, it figures differently in Rajiv's chapter.
Absolutely
but
right.
That in my perspective, having been there, having seen India in the cold, having gone every 2 days to the airport to receive a EU foreign minister who's coming us to tell us, please, no nuclear cloud over India and Pakistan, etc. Those were the days of the so-called purple cloud. We went from there to a completely different India in 2024. I think the nuclear deal played a very important role. We'll take two more questions. Please give the mic here. And
I have two questions. One is, are we, since now we're developing relations with the US on the military side, is there a danger that we'll start intervening with them into other countries in a military manner, which we have so far avoided? Because the US has this reputation of interfering militarily in so many places. We don't want to go there, do we? And secondly, when we talk about non-alignment, we don't seem to have raised our voices at all in the case of Israel, for instance, where there's clear genocide going on. Or in Ukraine, all we have to say is, this is not the time for war, this is a humanitarian crisis. Could we have not done much more to stop this nonsense? Thank you.
what is the second question? Could you raise your hand?
Palestine, yeah.
Palestine.
There's somebody who, here.
Thank you. My name is Saurabh Mishra. I've come from Australia along with my wife. I'm a 35-year member of that August Club of 30 million NRIs, OCIs. And may I say, the engagement with the diaspora of the Indian consulate or the high commissions has been really wanting. Has been wanting. Has been very, very patchy. And I wonder, and I'm taking advantage of so many ambassadors
You
in the
need
room.
to confine yourself to the book because we've run out of time.
Sure,
Do you have any
sure.
question on the book, please?
I'm going to read the book now. I'm going to buy it and
Okay,
read
so
the
then
book. Thank
please
you.
pass the mic to the person behind you. Thank you.
After the exit of Sheikh Hasina from Bangladesh, I find that things are not same in the country. The new dispensation neither respects our sensibilities. If they hurt Hindu population in Bangladesh, it hurts us. Whether they try to forcibly convert them or torture them or deprive them of their livelihood, and they have also desecrated our Hindu temples, disfigured our gods and goddesses, all this hurts us. And I do feel that the time has come when we should reshape our foreign policy and economic policy also, because the two are intertwined. And I don't feel that we should have a soft approach towards Bangladesh anymore in view of the spate of events which have taken place recently.
Thank you very much. What is your name, please?
My name is Rajarshi Dey.
You're a Bengali.
Yes.
Over to you.
The first question was, I don't think that we will get involved with any military intervention that the US may try to push us into. All indications are that it is precisely the kind of engagement we wish to avoid, which is why the Quad does not have the sharp military component that some of the United States and Japan and Australia may have. That is for AUKUS. So I don't think we'll get involved with that. And neither will the Americans come to us or help militarily if we are involved with China. I think I'm very clear on that. You have a point about
Israel and Ukraine. What have we achieved?
Well, Ukraine is different, but Gaza is a bit of a genocide. I agree with you. And in the past, yes, we would have spoken out more forcefully, but I think this is pragmatic politics. We have more to do with Israel. It matters to us. They've been very helpful to us. And the people of Gaza, well, the Palestinians never really supported us on things which mattered to us on Kashmir. So yes, there is a moral thing and so forth. I personally feel that what Israel is doing is wrong. But when you're in charge of foreign relations, you have to be quite unemotional about these things and see which side your bread is buttered. And I think that we have taken a call. Right or wrong is for the government to judge. But yes, there is a genocide going on. I think Israel will pay a price eventually. This is on Bangladesh, no soft approach. I think we could spend a whole evening discussing Bangladesh. But when we say no soft approach, we also have to bear in mind that Bangladesh matters hugely to us from the perspective of the northeastern states. So they also have some cards to play against us. I completely agree with you that we should be very forceful in the support of the Hindus who are in Bangladesh and all minorities there. Let us see. Already I sense that there is some trouble brewing in Bangladesh because their economy is in doldrums. And they will, I think, eventually come to some kind of an agreement with India. The government or so-called government which is running the show there is completely out of its depth. I think it's a fairly chaotic situation there. I hope that the government is thinking of some measures that we need to take. Perhaps the Americans also are a little worried things haven't quite gone the way they want to, but there is no doubt that Bangladesh will have to occupy a lot of our attention in the coming months because of the interdependence, because it's such a large neighbor and there's a porous border and it's also bordering Myanmar where there is so much trouble. We don't have time to go into detail, but I think my wife, who was High Commissioner in Bangladesh, follows it quick. She may have more insights into this matter. But Raja, you want to say something?
But thank you very much. To my Bengali friend, I'd like to say that I support a hard approach, but we have to understand that as far as Bangladesh is concerned, we cannot have a situation where we allow 1.5 million Hindus to come into West Bengal. This is not 71, where 10 million came, stayed and went back. If they come in, they will not go back. They will not go anywhere. And then we will lose West Bengal. So we have to be very clear that there cannot be emotion in politics. The 1.5 million Hindus have to stay in Bangladesh, and we have to create conditions to force the Bangladeshi government to look after them, to not have a genocide, and to bring order, which will happen when their economy collapses. And then they will come back to India exactly the way the Maldivians did. And to the gentleman who asked about US interventions, I'd like to say that the Americans have an unfortunate reputation of getting in and then being chased out in a disgraceful way. Let's not forget Vietnam. Let's not forget what happened in Saigon. Let's not forget their very untidy departure from Afghanistan with desperate Afghans clinging onto the wheels of the 747 which took off. The Americans have a very poor reputation of intervening and then running away. And they also have double standards, because otherwise, if they murdered Osama bin Laden and boasted about it, why do they think that international law should be double-faced? There's one law for them and one law for the others. With that, I thank you all very much for coming. Thank you very much, Ambassador Sikri and Ambassador Rajiv. Thank you all.